You are standing at the kitchen counter, scraping half a loaf of bread into the trash because it went hard as a brick again, and you tell yourself that is just how it goes. It is not. Most of the food you throw out every single week could have lasted 3 times longer, and the reason it did not comes down to a handful of little tricks our grandparents did without thinking. I know this because I threw away money for 40 years without ever noticing. I was the person who bought fresh and tossed it 3 days later. I paid for convenience I did not need, and I called it modern living. Before I finish, I am going to hand you something I found buried in a United States Department of Agriculture bulletin from 1911, a way to keep eggs fresh for close to a year with no refrigerator at all. It works in the kitchen you already have, with the hands you already have, no gadgets, no strength required. Stay with me, because once you see how simple it is, you are going to be a little angry nobody told you sooner. Let me start with the bread, because that is where I lost the most for the longest time. For years I kept my bread in the refrigerator. Everybody I knew did. My mother did it, my neighbor did it, and it felt like the responsible thing. Cold keeps food fresh. So cold must keep bread fresh too. That is what I believed, and I was completely wrong. The refrigerator is the fastest way to ruin a loaf of bread there is. Here is the part nobody explained to me. Bread does not go stale because it dries out. Bread goes stale because of something scientists call starch retrogradation. When bread bakes, the starch inside soaks up water and swells soft. As it cools and sits, those starch molecules slowly crystallize and squeeze the water back out, and the bread turns firm and crumbly. And here is the kicker that crystallizing happens fastest at refrigerator temperature, right around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Food chemists have measured it. Bread kept in the fridge goes stale up to 6 times faster than bread left on the counter. 6 times faster. I had been paying to spoil my own bread quicker. I read that and I just sat there thinking about the mountain of loaves I had thrown out over the decades, all because I put them exactly where they would harden the soonest. So what do you do instead? If you will eat the loaf within about 4 days, you leave it on the counter, sealed up, away from the sun. That is it. The counter, not the cold. But if you have more bread than you can eat in 4 days, you do not refrigerate it, you freeze it. The freezer is cold enough to stop the staling process almost completely because it locks the water in place before the starch can push it out. I slice my loaf first, freeze the slices flat, and pull out 1 or 2 at a time. They toast up like the morning they were baked. And here is the trick that made me feel like a fool for every hard loaf I ever tossed. Stale bread is not dead bread. If a loaf has gone firm on you, run the outside of it quickly under the tap so the crust is just damp. Then put it in a hot oven, around 300 degrees, for 10 to 12 minutes. What happens is that the heat and that little bit of moisture reverse the crystallizing. The starch relaxes and takes the water back in, and the loaf comes out soft and warm like it was fresh from the bakery. You can do this once with a loaf. My grandmother did it every week and never called it a trick. She just called it supper. Now, I could feel pretty good stopping there. I already saved you real money on bread alone. But bread was only the smallest thing I was getting wrong. And the next mistake was quietly rotting half of everything else in my kitchen. Because here is a question that stumped me for most of my life. Why does a bag of potatoes turn to sprouting mush a week after you buy it, when the same potatoes in a root cellar 100 years ago lasted all winter? It is not the potatoes. It is what you are storing next to them. There is an invisible gas involved, and once you understand it, half of your spoiled produce suddenly makes sense. The gas is called ethylene. Certain fruits and vegetables give it off naturally as they ripen: apples, bananas, tomatoes, pears, peaches, avocados. Ethylene is the ripening signal. It tells fruit to soften and sweeten and eventually rot. Scientists first identified this back in the early 1900s, and by the 1930s the produce industry understood it well enough to use it on purpose, gassing green fruit to ripen it before it hit the store. But nobody told the rest of us the flip side. If you keep your apples in the same bowl as your other produce, that apple is quietly gassing everything around it, forcing it all to ripen and spoil faster. I kept a lovely fruit bowl on my table for years, apples and bananas and whatever else all piled together, proud as could be, and I was running a little rotting machine right there in my dining room. The potato and onion story is the one that really got me. My whole life I kept potatoes and onions together in the same basket under the sink, because that is where my mother kept hers. Turns out onions give off both moisture and ethylene, and that combination makes potatoes sprout and soften faster than almost anything else you could put beside them. Potatoes and onions are the worst possible roommates. Store them apart: potatoes in a cool, dark, dry spot, onions in a separate cool spot with a little air, and both will last for weeks longer. Weeks. I timed it once I learned it, and I could not believe I had spent decades doing the one thing guaranteed to spoil both at once. So use the gas instead of letting it use you. Keep your ethylene producers, apples, bananas, tomatoes, off on their own. Keep your leafy greens and your potatoes away from them. And when you actually want something to ripen, like a rock-hard avocado or a green pear, put it in a paper bag with an apple, and the trapped ethylene will ripen it in a day or two. Same gas. You are just finally the one deciding when it works. And this is the moment I want to stop and say the quiet part out loud, because by now you might be feeling what I felt: a little bit cheated. None of this is complicated. None of it is secret science. It is basic knowledge that our grandparents lived by, and somewhere along the way it got dropped out of everyday life. Ask yourself who benefits when you throw away a third of your groceries and drive back to the store to buy them all over again. It is not you. The faster your food spoils, the more you buy. A kitchen that wastes food is a very profitable thing for everyone except the person who owns the kitchen. I am not saying anyone poisoned your potatoes. I am saying that once refrigerators and packaged food became the way we live, the knowledge that made food last stopped being taught because it stopped being needed to sell anything. Convenience got marketed to us as progress, and every clever little method that let a family stretch its food for months quietly slipped out of the cookbooks and out of our memory. We did not forget it because it stopped working. We forgot it because nobody was making money reminding us. The United States Department of Agriculture has put the number on it. The average American household throws away roughly a third of the food it buys. A third. On a fixed income, that is not a small leak. If your groceries cost you $400 a month, you are pouring something like 130 of those dollars straight into the trash, month after month, year after year. That is more than $1,500 a year in the garbage, and most of it comes down to not knowing a few things that used to be common sense. So let me keep handing them back to you, because there are more. And some are so simple you will want to try them tonight. Take eggs. For most of my life I had no idea how old my eggs really were, and I threw out perfectly good ones out of fear, and kept bad ones out of ignorance. Here is the test my grandmother used, and it costs nothing. Fill a glass or a bowl with water and gently set the egg in. A fresh egg sinks and lies flat on its side on the bottom. A slightly older egg, still perfectly good, stands up on one end but stays on the bottom. An egg that floats to the top is old and full of gas, and that one you let go. It works because as an egg ages, moisture leaves through the shell and air seeps in, and that growing air pocket makes it float. One glass of water and you never have to guess again. Now cheese. I used to wrap my cheese in plastic wrap. Pushed down tight, thinking I was protecting it. I was suffocating it. Cheese is alive in a way it needs to breathe a little. And sealed in tight plastic, it either sweats and turns slimy or grows mold at the surface. The old way is wax paper or parchment, wrapped loosely so it can breathe but stay protected. My cheese started lasting far longer and tasting far better the day I stopped strangling it in plastic. And if a hard cheese does get a little spot of mold on it, you do not throw the whole block away, you cut an inch around and below the spot and the rest is fine. That was standard knowledge in every farmhouse. We turned it into fear and waste. And fresh herbs, the ones that cost $2 or $3 a bunch and turn to black slime in the crisper drawer in 3 days. Treat them like flowers. Trim the stems, stand them up in a jar with an inch of water, and set the jar in the door of the refrigerator, or on the counter for the soft ones like basil. Loosely drape a bag over the top if you like. Mine went from lasting 3 days to lasting 2 full weeks. That is the difference between using a whole bunch of parsley and throwing 3/4 of it out every single time. That moment of realizing I had been working against myself in my own kitchen, that is exactly what pushed me to write down everything I had spent years uncovering, and it became a book called Start Smart. If any of this is landing for you the way it landed for me, Start Smart and its companion volume, Deeper Roots, go much further into the practical, forgotten methods that used to keep a household fed and independent. You can find the links in the description below. Now, back to the bread. Because knowing what went wrong is only half of it, you still need to know what to do instead. Now here is where I need to slow down and talk directly to some of you, because I know exactly who is listening right now and thinking this is fine for other people. Maybe money is tight this month, not tight like an inconvenience, tight like you are counting it. Maybe your hands do not work the way they used to. Maybe standing at the counter for very long is hard, or you live alone and cooking for one feels like more trouble than it is worth. I want you to hear me clearly. This next part was made for you especially, because the beautiful thing about every method I have told you is that the harder your life is, the more they give back, and not one of them asks anything of you that you cannot do sitting down. Not one of these tricks costs $1. The bread revival uses your tap and your oven you already own. Freezing your bread costs nothing extra, you are just moving it. The egg water test costs 1 glass of water you can pour sitting at the table. Keeping onions and potatoes apart costs you nothing but the decision to set them in 2 different spots. Standing herbs in a jar uses a jar you already have from something else. There is no equipment on this list. There is no gadget to buy, no subscription, nothing that expires, nothing you have to be strong to lift. And let me give you one made especially for cooking small, because feeding 1 or 2 people is where the most food gets wasted of all. When you cook, cook the whole thing, then freeze it in single portions before you ever sit down to eat. Soup, stew, beans, cooked rice, even scrambled eggs, all of it freezes and comes back fine. Use a muffin tin to freeze single servings into little pucks, then pop them out into a bag once they are solid. Now you have a freezer full of your own homemade meals, portioned for one, ready in minutes. You never cook when you are too tired. You never let leftovers rot in the back of the fridge, and you never waste a crumb. My freezer became my best friend the year my knees turned against me. It let me cook on a good day and eat well on a bad one. Here is another one for tired hands and tight budgets both. That bag of vegetables getting a little soft, the celery going bendy, the carrots losing their snap, the greens starting to wilt. Do not throw it out and do not try to save it fresh. Chop it all up, however roughly, and drop it in a bag in the freezer marked for soup. When the bag is full, you cover it with water in a pot, simmer it low, and you have made your own vegetable stock for free out of the exact scraps you used to bin. My grandmother had a pot for this going half the week. Nothing left her kitchen until it had given everything it had. And milk, since we are here. Milk freezes. I did not know that for most of my life. If you buy a jug and know you cannot finish it, pour a little off the top to give it room to expand, and put it straight in the freezer. Thaw it in the refrigerator, give it a good shake, and it is fine for cooking and drinking. For someone who cannot get to the store often, or who cannot carry much when they do, that is the difference between 1 trip and 3. Do you see the pattern? Every one of these was normal in a home that did not have money to waste. We did not lose them because they failed us. We lost them because for a little while we could afford to be careless, and carelessness got sold to us as freedom. Getting these back is not going backward. It is taking back control of your own kitchen and your own money from right where you are sitting. But I promised you something at the very beginning, and I have not forgotten. Because everything so far, as good as it is, still keeps your food for weeks. The thing I found buried in that old government bulletin keeps it for the better part of a year. And once you understand it, you will wonder how something this good could ever have been allowed to disappear. Let me take you back to 1911. In those days, most families did not have a refrigerator. An icebox if you were lucky, and ice cost money and melted away. Hens lay plenty of eggs in spring and summer, and then slow right down through the cold months. So, the great problem of every household was this. How do you take the flood of eggs from the good months and carry them through the winter when the hens go quiet? A family's whole supply of protein for months depended on solving it, and solve it they did. In 1911, the United States Department of Agriculture published guidance on a method that had already been used quietly in homes and on farms for generations, preserving eggs in something people called water glass. Water glass is the common name for sodium silicate, a thick, clear liquid you mixed with water. You would take fresh, clean, unwashed eggs straight from the hen, never rinsed, and lower them gently into a crock filled with that solution. And then you simply left them in a cool corner of the cellar. Here is why it works, and it is beautiful in its simplicity. A fresh eggshell is covered with a natural coating called the bloom, which seals thousands of tiny pores. The water glass solution seals those pores even more completely, locking air out and moisture in. No air, no bacteria getting in, no moisture escaping. The egg is suspended in time. Families reported keeping eggs this way for 8 months, 9 months, close to a year, and cracking them open in the dead of winter to find them good. Now I have to be honest with you, because I am not going to send you off after old sodium silicate you have to hunt down. The old-timers had a second version of this same idea, and it is the one I want you to actually use, because you can do it this weekend with something sitting in a store right now. It is called pickling lime food-grade calcium hydroxide, and you will find it in the canning aisle for a couple of dollars a bag, one bag lasting you ages. Here is the whole method, and it could not be simpler. You take a big glass jar or a food-safe crock. You stir together roughly 1 ounce of pickling lime for every quart of cool water, about 2 tablespoons to the quart until it is mixed. Then you take fresh, clean, completely unwashed eggs, and this is the one rule you cannot break. They must never have been washed, because washing strips off that natural bloom that does half the sealing, and you lower them gently into the solution so they are fully covered. You put a lid on loosely, and you set the jar somewhere cool and dark, a pantry floor, a basement, a cool closet. That is it. That is the entire thing. And those eggs will keep submerged like that for 12 to 18 months. I tried it because I did not believe it. I am the skeptic in this story, remember? I set up a jar, wrote the date on a piece of tape, and put it in the back of my pantry, fully expecting to prove the internet wrong. Months later, I fished one out, rinsed it, cracked it into a pan, and it stood up firm and fresh like it had been laid that morning. I stood there in my kitchen and actually laughed out loud, because I realized my great-grandmother knew something my whole modern life had never taught me. She could carry eggs across the winter without electricity, without a store, without spending a dime once the jar was set. And we called ourselves the advanced ones. Think about what that means for you. Eggs go on sale, you buy extra, and instead of racing to eat them before they turn, you tuck them into a jar and forget them for a year. A power outage does not touch them. A hard month where you cannot get to the store does not scare you. You have protein on the shelf, sealed and waiting, the way every self-reliant household in this country used to before we handed our food security over to a refrigerator and a grocery run. That is the piece that had been quietly taken from us. Not because it stopped working, it never stopped working. It got set aside when convenience arrived, and it survived only because a handful of stubborn country folks and old canning books refused to let it die, and because a government bulletin from over 100 years ago wrote it down before the world moved on. Now it is back in your hands, where it belongs. So let me leave you with the truth I wish somebody had handed me 30 years ago. You were never careless and you were never wasteful by nature. You were simply never taught the things that used to be as ordinary as making the bed, and you paid for that gap every single week without ever seeing the bill. Taking it back does not make you old-fashioned. It makes you the kind of person who refuses to keep paying strangers for what your own 2 hands can do from a kitchen chair. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this. Of everything I shared today, the bread trick with the damp crust and the hot oven, the potatoes and onions that should never have been stored together, or those eggs sitting in lime water for a whole year, which one did your mother or your grandmother do that you had completely forgotten until right now? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where you are watching from, because I love seeing how far this old kitchen wisdom reaches. Some of you are holding memories the rest of us have lost, and one sentence from you might hand somebody else a method their family let slip away. If today gave you back even one thing that had quietly gone missing, then you belong with us, a whole group of people done being upsold and drained, taking back the practical knowledge that used to keep a household strong and independent. Subscribe and stand with us, because next time I am opening up something even the careful ones get wrong. There is one common thing sitting in almost every refrigerator right now, on the shelf where you think it is safest. that is spoiling faster there than it would anywhere else in your kitchen, and I am going to show you exactly where it should have been all along. I will see you there. Before you go, let me tell you where this really opens up. This video was just the overview inside my membership. The full method continues step by step. It's called the Wise Living Circle, and in there you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone. You'll belong here. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime.